Atari has been in the news recently, and as has been the case every time they've been in the news for the last 2 decades, it's entirely because they're making a fool of themselves again. So in celebration of their latest eye-rolling money-making scheme, let's look back at the last decade or so of Atari's missteps. Now, how can we do that when Clickist only covers indie games? Why, because for the last few years, Atari has been relying on indie developers to make their games, and now they're even relying on crowdfunding and an indie-driven micro-console. What happened to the once king of video games? Well, they died, for one thing. The Atari that created the Atari 2600 is not the same Atari of today. I'll keep this brief, but I suggest you look up the full story yourself, it's quite the tale. Basically, after the video game crash of 1983, Atari was split into 2. East and West. This marked the beginning of the era called the Cold War. Sorry. Atari founder Nolan Bushnell sold the company to Warner Communications in 1976, and by 1984, they were looking to offload the failing company thanks to that whole video game crash. So they split Atari into 2 companies, Atari Corporation, which focused on their computer hardware, and Atari Games, which retained the rights to Atari's arcade games. That year, Atari Corporation was sold to Jack Tramiel, and the following year, Atari Games was sold to Namco, and eventually it went to Midway, and that half died with them in 2010. The other half, Atari Corporation, continued operating under Tramiel, releasing several computers, the Atari Lynx and the Atari Jaguar. Those last 2 were massive flops, forcing Tramiel to sell the company in 1998 to Hasbro. However, Hasbro only bought the Atari name and its IPs, not any of its staff, offices, or hardware rights or anything like that. Then in 2001, Hasbro sold its gaming division, including Atari, to French publisher Infogrames, and yes, it's Infogrames, not Infogames. Maybe it's a French thing, I don't know. Either way, they eventually changed their name to Atari SA, so it doesn't matter. By all accounts, the company has been failing miserably for years, constantly closing down smaller studios it owns, laying off staff, selling off some of their IP like Test Drive, and even filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2013. In 2015, the company announced a turnaround strategy they hoped would reinvent themselves. While this new strategy certainly has some interesting ideas, it seems to incorporate many aspects of their old strategy. This includes hiring indie developers, using a crowdfunding website nobody's ever heard of, and now they're even releasing their own console. Yes, really, they're going to release their own console soon.
How is it possible that your senses haven't reacted to a place like this? You've had visions and episodes even before entering the Myrtles plantation and in Greenwich. Yeah, sorry, I'm pushing you too much. Let me fix this camera.
Is there anything I can do to help you set up your instruments?
Please.
The problems with Atari's comeback strategy are numerous, and we'll start with what's most relevant to this channel, using indie developers to create their games. Since 2010, Atari has pumped out as many as 20 games. It's hard to put an exact number on it because they've recalled some of these, and most of them don't get any press coverage whatsoever. We'll begin with Haunted House, a top-down exploration game that's a remake or a reimagining of the old Atari 2600 game of the same name. For this game, Atari went with developer Imagine Inglen, a company that, as far as I can tell, doesn't exist outside of this one game. I can't find any information about them before they released this game, nor after. They exist only on the Steam page for this game, as far as I can tell, and that's it. So we'll move on to their next game, Star Raiders in 2011, and the more retro-minded among you may already notice a pattern here. Yes, Star Raiders is also a reimagining of an Atari 2600 game. This one's an on-rail space shooter and was pretty poorly received at the time, earning a cool 35 on Metacritic. Anyway, Star Raiders was developed by Incinerator Studios, who used to be owned by THQ, but went independent in 2009. In fact, Star Raiders is the only game they made as an indie studio before shutting down. Likely sometime in 2016, as that's when their website was taken down. Next up is Killspace Entertainment's Yar's Revenge, another reimagining of an Atari 2600 game. There's quite the story to tell about Killspace Entertainment, a story that involves that pathetic Apocalypse Now Kickstarter campaign a while back. I'll save the good stuff for its own video someday, but let me read you a quote from an article on The Verge. Employees complained of thousands of dollars in unpaid wages, erratic and out-of-touch management, and financial decisions that made an already bad situation worse. One person called Killspace the worst run company you could possibly imagine. Another simply referred to their time as a nightmare. Believe it or not, those 3 games were actually the best Atari had to offer. From here on out, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, starting with 2014's Haunted House Cryptic Graves. This is a first-person horror game trying to take advantage of the popular genre on Steam, and developed by Anna creator Dream Painter Software. Cryptic Graves is an infamously broken, buggy, poorly slapped together mess that has a pathetic 10 rating on Metacritic. Part of that is because it has voice acting from a literal text-to-speech engine, and part of it is because it looks like it was made in the mid-1990s. Dream Painter seems to have taken this project on out of desperation, and rushed it. On their website, they have a blog post detailing how they tried to find a publisher for another game, Master Obscura, but were unable to find one and had to cancel it. That was only a year or 2 before the release of Cryptic Graves, and now they're working on a game called White Heaven. How exciting. 2015 saw the release of Asteroids Outpost on Steam Early Access, perhaps one of the most infamous games ever released, at least it would be if anyone cared. Developed by Salty Games, who remain just as elusive as Imagine Engline, Outpost was a reimagining of Asteroids, only it had nothing to do with asteroids. Like Cryptic Graves, Atari wanted to take advantage of popular trends in gaming, this time with an online, open-world survival crafting game where you occasionally shoot falling asteroids out of the sky to gather resources. Yes, Atari turned asteroids into a crafting game. At least they didn't put zombies in it, I guess. And it wasn't a very good game either. It was panned by critics and players alike as being buggy and boring. In fact, it was so bad, it was eventually removed from Steam entirely before it was ever even finished. Next up is Alone in the Dark Illumination by Pure FPS, a studio created by the co-founder of Plastic Piranha, and for some of you, that name alone is enough to start setting off alarm bells. Plastic Piranha is the studio behind Recoil, the first real high-profile failure of Steam Early Access. At the risk of repeating myself, Recoil was a buggy, broken, unplayable mess of a game that received universally negative reviews and was hated by the community. The perfect company to bring Alone in the Dark back. Illumination was a total departure from the series, a once PC-exclusive point-and-click horror game. Atari decided to turn that into a co-op third-person shooter that, say it with me, was plagued by bugs and was panned for having boring, unbalanced, and derivative gameplay. You might be noticing another pattern here. Now, by this point, you're probably thinking Atari does a bad job of picking developers. So far we've seen 2 that don't seem to exist outside the one game they made for the publisher, 2 with poor reputations to put it politely, and 2 that have never really stood out in any way. Oh, but you've seen nothing yet. We've now come to the RollerCoaster Tycoon World portion of the program, where Atari hired not 1, not 2, but 3 different developers to work on one game. RCT World developer number 1 was Pipeworks Software, an indie studio that stuck around by working entirely on licensed games up until that point. Some of their games include Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, Dancing with the Stars, and, that kind of stuff. They're not independent anymore, as they're now part of Digital Bros Group, which also owns 505 Games. They were announced as the first developer on Worlds in around August 2014, but were dumped almost right away. Developer number 2 was Area 52 Games, a new studio composed of former veterans who worked on Tropico, The Sims, Railroad Tycoon, and the Age of Empires games. They were put in charge of Worlds sometime in December 2014. They got to stick around with the game longer than Pipeworks, but they don't seem to be around anymore, as their website is down and their Twitter account hasn't been active since before it was even announced they were working on the game to begin with. Finally, developer number 3 was Invisio Creations, the folks who finally shipped the game out. According to Motherboard, they were spun off from Funcom and previously worked on MMOs. RCT World is their first game, and they're currently working on RollerCoaster Tycoon Switch, which we'll get into, don't you worry. In between the 2, they also worked on their own game separate from Atari called Rock, I think, maybe? RollerCoaster Tycoon World was hated by longtime fans of the franchise and new players alike. It had the exact same problems as every game on this list. It was full of glitches and bugs, suffered from uninspired gameplay, and they even had the gall to release it the day before Planet Coaster. How do you think that went? And none of that even covers their weird mobile stuff they've done, like Atari Fit, a weight loss app that lets you play some old Atari 2600 games while you work out, or Atari Scratchers, a damn lottery gambling game, or even Pride Fest, another recalled game that was supposed to be about the LGBT community, but was actually a shitty sim where you had to build a parade, and of course it was full of microtransactions. When you look at this catalog of games, it's impossible not to think the worst. Giving these classic franchises to indie developers to work on should be easy. Most of them are based on Atari 2600 games, which aren't exactly full of deep gameplay and engaging storylines, so these developers have a clean slate to do more or less whatever they want. But with Haunted House Cryptic Graves, Asteroids Outpost, and Alone in the Dark Illumination, it's clear Atari only wanted to chase trends in the hopes of making a buck. So we have a publisher desperate to claw its way out of bankruptcy, hiring the cheapest developers they could find to reimagine their old franchises that, honestly, no one cares about anymore, hoping for brand recognition, and then likely forcing those developers to chase trends to appeal to anybody who'll listen while pumping out the games as quickly as possible, while also putting out mobile games full of microtransactions left, right, and center. It's no wonder all these games were terrible. It's impossible to make a good game under those conditions.
Do you still believe that I really saw the things I told you?
Anya.
And now we get to the present day. Recently it's become especially clear that Atari has lost its mind with two, again let's be polite here and call them bold moves. At E3 2017, Atari announced what would become known as the Atari Box, their first video game console since the Jaguar back in 1993. Let me say that again. Atari is working on a video game console. At first, everybody assumed it would just be like the NES Classic, full of ROMs of old games. While that's partially true, Atari later dropped another bombshell. It would also play brand new games. This will apparently be similar to the Ouya or the Game Stick or whatever example you like. It is a micro console because those all turned out really well, didn't they? Frankly, I have no idea how the hell they're doing this. They're releasing a console or a micro console or a Linux machine, whatever you want to call it, on the heels of declaring for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Making a console is expensive work. How can they possibly afford to... Oh. And that's especially bizarre when you take into consideration their second, more recent announcement. RollerCoaster Tycoon Switch for the Nintendo Switch is seeking crowdfunding on the equity crowdfunding site Fig. Wait, no, sorry, it's actually a place called Start Engine? Does anybody know what Start Engine is?
Don't want your power messing with the instruments. Again. Did the lawyer tell you how this house was built?
Okay, Start Engine is basically an equity crowdfunding site like Fig in that you're not really donating to a campaign so much as you're investing in it with the goal of not only helping the project be created, but also to make money off it in the future. And don't be confused, it's not Kickstarter, no matter how much of the UI they rip off. They're even using a similar shade of green to Kickstarter's old logo, the cheeky scamps. RollerCoaster Tycoon Switch might be one of the worst crowdfunding campaigns I have ever seen. I don't really know where to start with this thing. I mean, the bulk of this video was supposed to be talking about this campaign, but Atari has screwed up so many times over the last few years that this video is already too long, but hey, that's just how bad Atari is. Invest any amount of money into the campaign, with $250 as a minimum, the page reads, and earn your pro rata share of 50% of profits until you made 120% of your original investment, after which you'll earn your pro rata share of 25% of the profits until 18 months after the worldwide launch of the game, or the earlier termination of our license to market and sell the game. I like the exclamation mark at the end there, as if that livens things up or makes that prospect any more appealing. The entire page is written just like that, by the way, this corporate business lawyer speak that doesn't convey any love nor care for the game they're trying to get you to buy. Oh yes, that is what this is, by the way, a purchase. If you invest in RollerCoaster Tycoon Switch, you don't actually get a copy of the game, just a 25% discount code, and that's only if you invest. And that's only if you invest $750 or more. These utterly cheap hacks can't even reward investors with a copy of the game they're investing in. It's like a parody of crowdfunding. Well, nobody's biting, which probably doesn't come as a surprise to anybody except maybe Atari. The Start Engine money counter thing says $47,388 raised of $10,000, $1.7 million goal. What? $47,000 raised of $10,000, $1 million. I don't know what that means, but also the legal documents linked on the page says there's actually a $2 million goal, so yeah. I could go on diving deeper into this wretched scum of villainy and hives, but I think we all get the point for now. Maybe one day I'll do a Kicked examining this campaign in more detail, but this video has gone on long enough, and Oh, Atari, what have you done? No sooner I finish writing this script, I get ambushed by this story. Game maker Atari is planning to launch its own cryptocurrency. The headline on CoinDesk reads, "Oh no, Atari, honey, no." Last week's statement also notably hints at the creation of a second token, which would be used in conjunction with the online casino plan. To broaden the appeal of these new casinos, and once the Atari token is available, Atari has the project to launch Pong Token, a second token dedicated to crypto casinos and usable on these gaming sites. The details of this launch of crypto casinos will be announced soon, the statement reads. Oh no, Atari, no! Cryptocurrencies and crypto casinos? Oh, for God's sakes, really? Come on. Oh well, at least now we might get to play the equity crowdfunded RollerCoaster Tycoon Switch on our micro-console Atari boxes that we paid for with our cryptocurrency Atari tokens. What a world we live in, I hate it.
This is such an exceptional coincidence, and you know me.
You don't trust coincidences. Like that time in Gibraltar.
Yes, and that whole investigation was a letdown, wasn't it? And this time, I hope it will be worth our time. Well, if we can make it through the night, you'll be stinking rich, my dear lady.
Stop it.
Well, here we are then, ladies.